Hello and welcome back to District of Sports, our sports podcast here at the Washington Times. I'm George Gerbo. A reminder that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That includes on Apple, TuneIn, Spotify, and more. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app. And also a reminder that you can find all of our sports coverage at the Washington Times at washingtontimes.com/sports. The interest in professional women's sports is growing at a breakneck, exponential pace nationwide. Much of that attention has been focused on basketball and the WNBA, but it was women's soccer, specifically the success of the United States women's national team, that made the first inroads into America's collective sports consciousness. It's a trend that's continuing here locally with the Washington Spirit. DC's professional women's soccer team is third in the National Women's Soccer League standings, boasting a league-leading 9 wins and an undefeated mark in their last 5 matches. Fresh offsetting a single-game club attendance record of nearly 20,000, the Spirit are on pace to best last year's average attendance, which was their first at Audi Field in Southwest, and are a contender to win their second NWSL championship. And so joining me on this edition of the District of Sports is Washington Spirit broadcast team member Michael Minnich to talk about all of the success this team has had and kind of contrast it with the history of this franchise and the history of soccer here in the DMV. And there's really nobody better to do that than Michael Minnich. Good to have you.
Great to be here, and great always to talk to you, sir. It's been a while, and we've been talking for a while.
It has been a while. It has been a while, absolutely. And what better thing to talk about than something that's in your wheelhouse, such as soccer, and specifically women's soccer, coming off of a record crowd of nearly 20,000 people at Audi Field on Saturday in a 1-1 draw against the San Diego Wave, where Croix Bethune, who we'll talk about in just a moment, gets the equalizer in stoppage time. And for someone that was watching from afar, just really cool to follow along and see this team that you know so intimately well. You've been with since the founding of the franchise and the league, really back in 2012. And I just kind of want because I've seen everybody talking about, oh man, look at Gray breaking the attendance record. And I'm like, Michael will understand and give me the appreciation of going from the soccerplex in Gaithersburg and playing games there in nascent, probably doesn't even begin to describe how things started for this league way back when women professional sports leagues for soccer for women specifically were still trying to get their footing. And now to see 20,000 people at Audi Field on Saturday, just for you as a member of this broadcast and being a part of that, what was that like? What was that experience like?
It was amazing, George. And I think the thing that also is great about it is it wasn't like this was a novelty. It wasn't like, oh, this is the last game before the Olympics. This is the first game back from the Olympics. This was just a Saturday game in June. Obviously, Alex Morgan's in town. She's a draw. You've got some big names, but like people are coming to watch this team play. And, you know, they really moved to Audi Field full time last year. They played kind of on and off between there and Leesburg for a couple of years. But you know, looking at the historical crowds, the top 25 crowds in franchise history are all at Audi Field. So that tells you just in the last 2 or 3 years how much the attendance has exploded and the move to Audi has worked well for this club from a attendance perspective, a marketing perspective, all the above.
And I assume going to break by the time we get to the end of this season, what the average attendance was last season was in 5 figures. And I assume it's going to push even further after another full season at Audi Field. And going along with that is what you guys do as part of ESPN 630, the sports capital, as the Washington Spirit broadcast team. This new partnership now, one of the few radio broadcasts across the league, across the NWSL. And you guys get to do some really unique things, and just having an expanded, tell me about your role in being in this partnership now, where going from, you know, I can imagine you from back in our college radio days, setting up in cords and running extension cords and just trying to find internet to now being on the sports capital here in the district, and what that experience has been like and how this partnership has gone so far.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start at the beginning. When I was doing the Spirit games, starting with the inaugural year in 2013, it was basically my audio equipment, my board, my headsets, you know, plugged into, you know, a video stream, but we were using my equipment. And then for exhibition games, it was totally just audio stream, my equipment. And now it's, you know, professionally set up. We have, you know, a producer on site. We have an audio person on site. We have, you know, kind of an executive producer on site, along with Bram Weinstein, who I'm sure a lot of people know is the voice of the Commanders, you know, radio host in the DC market. Gabby Vincent's a former player, works for the mayor's office. And then there's me. And my job is to kind of provide like the historical perspective. I've been with this league since the beginning. This club, who I've been with, I was the voice for 4 years. I have worked with on the stat side, the research side since last year. So to come back and see this and, call a game in front of 20,000 people at Audi Field was phenomenal. It's really cool to see how far this has come.
And let's go back to that game, and specifically the on the field action. Spirit come away with the 1-1 draw, now undefeated in their last 5, 4-0-1 in their last 5 games, and there are not enough superlatives to describe, Michael, what Croix Bethune is doing this season. And it's a team that's had, as you well know, its share of women's soccer stars. Rose Lavelle was once on the Spirit. Of course, Trinity Rodman is still on the Spirit, and we don't want to forget about Trinity because she's going to do big things, I believe, as we get down the line here in her career and in the Olympics. But Croix Bethune out of Georgia also played at Southern California, and she's been the Rookie of the Month for every month so far this season, which tells you what the year-end award is going to look like and who it's going to go to at this point. The first NWSL player to combine for 10 goals and assists in her first 10 matches. It's just truly incredible, and specifically on Saturday, getting a ball in stoppage time and corralling it and getting the equalizer to come away with the draw there. Just what is the things in her game that make her so special and so unique?
She's such a creative player, and she's such an intuitive player. And, it's interesting because you've got Trinity Rodman, who basically came straight out of college and is actually younger than Croix Bethune, who got drafted out of college. So she had that experience, has come through a couple of ACL injuries, but has always been a highly rated player. But it's been interesting, the games that she's kind of been rotated and rested, you can see a difference in this team. They're missing that link. She's so good at taking the ball from the deep lying midfielders, whether it's Andy Sullivan, Al Hirschfeld, and her chemistry with Trinity Rodman, Ule Sarr, Ashley Hatch up front has been great. And she's already set the club record for single season assists with 8. The league record is only 10. So she's got half a season basically to get 2 more, 3 more, tie that record, break that record. She's been great. And again, this team took a big risk. They just missed the playoffs last year. The only week that they were not in playoff position was after the last week of the season. So they trade Ashley Sanchez, who was on the national team roster for the World Cup last year. Sam Staub had started every game in her career. They trade both those players for draft picks. Croix Bethune was one of those picks. And there were a lot of questions about this team to say, well, we're trading 2 of our pieces. What are we doing? Well, what we're doing is we're bringing in dynamic players who can change the course of this team. And it's been wonderful to watch. In 3rd place right now, but leading the league in wins with 9.
Yeah, most wins in the league, just a point back in the table from being the best team point wise in the league. And I want to kind of do put in perspective this league that you follow for so long, and just the correlation, if there is any, that we're seeing with the attention, we'll call it the attention on women's sports, that is great to see, and it feels like it's been building for a lifetime. And of course, what Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and players like that are doing in the WNBA, great. But women's soccer was kind of, as you can speak to, the first place that we saw a growth and organic, meaning, I played not very well, but I played when I was growing up. Girls across the country playing when they're growing up in their community in West Virginia, where I grew up. Like, that was the most accessible sport. It really wasn't basketball. It wasn't any baseball. It was soccer. It was easy to get young boys and specifically young girls into. And when obviously the women's national team and the success that they have had, of course, helps that a lot and draws a lot of attention, going back all the way to Mia Hamm and the 98 team. But to see now the interest in not only women's soccer, but women's sports on the whole, from your perspective, something that's been building, and you're now finally seeing the fruits of what those players in 98 have put into in terms of growing the game professionally for women here stateside? Or is there something that it's kind of also getting on the wave with, hey, women's basketball is doing good. It's an Olympic year, so you've got gymnastics and swimming and just a cumulative interest in women's sports on the whole? Or maybe it's a bit of both of those things.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting process the last 30 years because, as you said, the 99 team, Mia Hamm, Christine Lilly, Brandy Chastain, iconic. But when that group retired, there was a bit of a lull. Abby Wambach was a star, but I remember leading up to the 2011 World Cup, they were playing their send-off game, and it was 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people in Philadelphia. So I feel like what started this tide really was that 2011 World Cup. The Wambach header off the Megan Rapinoe cross against Brazil. People started watching that one crazy. They didn't win the World Cup that year, but then that led into a championship in 2015, championship in 2019. And then by then the league had, the third try at a league had launched. It was successful. It was, obviously there was some growing pains, but now we're to the point where Kansas City has built a brand new facility, which I'm going to visit in about 2 weeks. I'm really excited to see that. Always sold out. LA is drawing 18, 19, 20,000 at their stadium, which is right by the LA Coliseum. We talked about the spirit of success at Audi Field. The league's going to go over 1 million fans this week for the season. And that was something that hadn't happened as recently as 3 or 4 years ago.
It's awesome to see. And I think too, that this region will get a bad rap sometimes in relation to its sports fandom. And I think probably because, the Commanders or the football, we understand football is the top dog and the Commanders are the biggest. If the Commanders ever won a Super Bowl again, it'd be people in this town would go nuts, more so than even we saw for what the Caps did and what the Nats did, I would say. But adding to that, there are so many people from not only all across the country that have ended up in DC, but all across the world. It's truly a global city. And so you've got all of these things represented in so many different sports. And now we're starting, I think it helps. The Audi Field thing is a big thing because admittedly, when you've got a team in a name venue, I think that does a lot. A name venue that is centrally located where you don't have to, have 6 ways to Sunday to tell people how to get there and where it's at. And it's off an interstate and all this type of stuff, especially in a city like DC where you can take metro and walk and get there. You can take Uber, you can take a bike, you can drive to, and to get to Audi Field. I think just with Washington, you've got so many different constituencies that, there's an interest definitely and has been here for women's soccer. And when you make it a little more accessible to them, I think that kind of pushes people to go, much like another Audi Field tenant in the Defenders where, what's, minor league football or professional football, but on a smaller scale going to do here. And they now, both in the 2 years post-pandemic and in the season, truncated season during the pandemic, have drawn well and been successful there. And I think now providing that same opportunity, putting women's sports and women's soccer on the same level playing field where they're playing in a professional venue that's not run down RFK or it's not further out in the suburbs, I think makes a big deal.
Yeah, and I think accessibility is a great word as well on the media side. We've seen that with women's basketball. You put the tournament on ESPN, you publicize it, you build around Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, Sabrina Ionescu, stars that people can follow year to year. I think that makes a big difference. And I also think that's what's helped the national team. Alex Morgan's been part of the picture for 15 years. You talk about somebody like Trinity Robbins, who's on the rise. Like, it's just a constant thing. And also, I think it's neat in Trinity's case and a couple other cases, it's a name you recognize. It's Dennis Rodman's daughter. It was really cool to see the league play at Wrigley Field last week. Penelope Hawking shows up for Chicago wearing her dad Denny's jersey from the Minnesota Twins. She scores in that game. So we had the stat of first, father-daughter duo to score at Wrigley Field. Things like that are awesome to kind of see as the league grows and the league builds.
I was covering the Red Bull event a couple weeks ago in the district, and they had Trinity Rodman, who's a Red Bull athlete, in David Coulthard or Sebastian Vettel's Formula One winning car from a decade ago, like things like that, and just the crossover and the exposure, and seeing other athletes from other sports, like women's basketball players showing up at the Spirit games and Spirit players showing up at Mystics games like that. It's just cool to see it kind of coming together full circle. You mentioned Alex Morgan, which is a good transition because I wanted to get your thoughts on this upcoming Olympic field, which will maybe not likely have Alex Morgan. We'll see. I'll get your opinion on that. But it's a team that's obviously in transition a little bit. Emma Hayes came over from Chelsea to lead this team. And you've got, of course, people like Rose Lavelle, we mentioned, Lindsey Horan. So some stars that Americans, I think, will remember. But, Julie Ertz has retired. Megan Rapinoe, of course, has retired. And it may or may not be an Olympic year for Alex Morgan. I guess the point being to start there is do you think that she'll end up being a part of this roster when it's finalized here in a few weeks?
My gut is yes, but there's a couple of things going against her. The biggest one is, unless they change the rule like they did at the last minute for Tokyo, you only take 18 players.
18.
So it really becomes more difficult to make that roster, obviously, if you're going 18 versus 23. And then what hurt the U.S. last year was timing. Mallory Swanson was hurt. Katarina Macario was hurt. Becky Sauerbrunn got hurt right before the games. So you had some players that were on that team, might not necessarily make this team. And Alex Morgan, she's coming off an injury. She's been back the last couple of weeks. She hasn't scored since March for club. So she was in the last camp for the national team. She's on the bubble. And I think certainly there's something to be said for veteran leadership and having someone who's won a couple World Cups. And I think that goes in Alex Morgan's favor. But there's no guarantee she'll be on that roster in Paris.
It's a roster that, of course, is younger, but also I dare say, Mike, that it's crazy to say for the Americans that it could surprise some people that, they got the CONCACAF win earlier this year. They beat Canada in the She Believes Cup. Canada comes in defending off of Tokyo, which of course was, in 2021. So pandemic Olympics and everything, but, they come in. Americans haven't won since 2012 in the Olympics, and Germany won in between there. But I think that since it's not especially coming off the World Cup performance, which was panned both abroad and also by our own supporters and former players here domestically about the behavior, the way that the women's team acted when they weren't maybe necessarily as good as they thought they were. I'll leave that for another day. But it seems that this team may be able to, I'm not going to say win, but they can maybe surprise some people in a way that, hey, the Americans are down, we can get them. And that may not be the case just yet.
And it's interesting because the World Cup and Olympics are back-to-back years, which they usually are. So usually the last couple of cycles has been, okay, well, we won the World Cup. This is the last dance for player A, B, or C. Now it's the opposite. It's like, well, we failed at the World Cup. Like you said, Megan Rapinoe has retired. There's been some turnover in the roster. And now it's like, okay, well, now we've got a new coach. We're building towards the next World Cup, hosting potentially in 6 years. So now it's the time for Trinity Rodman, who's 21, 22. It's the time for Mal Pugh. It's the time for these younger players to get a chance. And it might be the last opportunity for some of these players to get a gold medal because they're going to be phased out in this next cycle. And you mentioned Emma Hayes. She's only been on the job for a couple of weeks. She finished her club season at Chelsea, much like Jonathan Heraldez is doing with the Spirit. We've got an interim coach right now in Washington, and we're third in the league. We've got Barcelona's coach coming in because he finished his club year. So Emma's only really had one camp to figure out things. What are her preferences going to be in terms of tactics? And also because of the 18-player roster, you have to pick differently in terms of, can this player play 2 or 3 spots? With 23, you can bring specialists. You can bring Megan Rapinoe to come off the bench and hit crosses for 30 minutes. With an 18-player roster, you don't have that luxury to take someone that's a specialist. You have to take someone that's a generalist.
And 2 more matches, I believe, ahead of the Olympics to kind of sort some things out there.
One in D.C.
And one in D.C., yes, yeah. Before we get to that cut-down line here in a few weeks. I'll get you out of here on this. I won't ask you for a World Cup prediction, but I will ask you for the Spirit, who sit third in this table right now. And as you said, with the most wins in the league, some harder games ahead, Orlando down the line, and Kansas City down the line. Projection to is it's obviously a championship contending team. Is it a championship year? Will it be a championship year for the Spirit this season?
I think the chances are good. It seems like the top 3, and again, we're halfway through the season, things can change, but Orlando, Kansas City, and Washington have really separated themselves in terms of points. So I would be shocked if somebody breaks into that top 3. Now, Gotham, if they beat the Spirit head-to-head this coming weekend, that could change things too. But I think that's going to be your top 3. So then it's matchups. San Diego came in last week, 9th in the league, but with Alex Morgan, with Naomi Girma, played the Spirit extremely well. They needed that late goal from Croix Bethune to get the tie. So it's all based on matchups and form. I mean, we saw the team that was seeded the lowest in a 16 playoff in Gotham win it last year. So it's just a matter of getting hot at the right time. And I think the Spirit team can do it. I think their youth helps them, they'll hopefully be a little bit fresher going into the postseason. And also the hope is if you can lock in one of those top 3 seeds, maybe you can rest some people a little bit and rotate. They've got some help coming in the transfer market. They've got a really good Colombian midfielder, Lacey Santos, coming in. They just signed Esme Morgan, who's an English international, to bolster the defense. They'll be in after the Olympics. So I'm curious to see, too, how that affects the depth of this team. They got pretty thin in that San Diego game because of injuries. They need some extra bodies there on the way. And then also, how do you adjust to a new coach coming in midseason? Does that help you? Does that mess things up a little bit? A lot of interesting things to see, but I do think talent-wise, this is a championship contending team.
Michael Minnich of the Washington Spirit broadcast team. Game this weekend in Gotham, and then back home in 2 weeks against North Carolina. Let everybody know where they can find the broadcast and find your work.
Yes, so the easiest way to find it, the Spirit website will have a link no matter what, WashingtonSpirit.com, because sometimes we'll be over the air, sometimes we'll be on streaming only, but we'll be on streaming no matter what. So that's the easiest way to do it. And then ESPN 630's website, you can find us there as well. Also have a podcast that we're doing post-game that has kind of post-game thoughts from Bram and Gabby and myself, as well as the post-game press conference, some look ahead. So some extra content there that you won't get on the radio, as well as what you can get on the radio. So it's been a mix of that. And that's been fun to do too, is kind of add that element in, do some stuff post-game, kind of collect thoughts and put that on podcast form too.
Awesome. Michael, I appreciate it. Good to see you as always.
Absolutely, George. Always a pleasure.
My thanks again to Michael for joining me. You can catch him alongside Bram Weinstein and Gabby Vincent on the next Washington Spirit broadcast, June 22nd at 1:30 p.m. as the Spirit visit Gotham FC. They'll return home to Audi Field to take on the North Carolina Courage on June 29th at 7:30 p.m. Games can always be found on the ESPN 630 app and at sportscapitaldc.com. And a reminder that you can find the District of Sports wherever you get your podcasts. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app. And all of our sports coverage, of course, can be found at washingtontimes.com/sports and at WashTimeSports on social media. I'm George Gerbo. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.